So, hello and welcome to today's episode of Dr. Simone's Mindspace. I'm very, very excited to continue a conversation on a new topic, but a conversation I had with a very special guest from Hong Kong. And I've had been having the opportunity and pleasure to see her live. So thank you again in Hong Kong. So thank you again, Katia, for taking your time to talk today on the podcast and sharing your wisdom and knowledge and also your positivity. I think there's a way in you that is just energizing, no matter in which situation in life one is. There is always a way to get out of that conversation with you with a smile. It's really, for me, it's quite unique. So thank you. And yeah, I'll
Thank you for having me back, Simone. It's always a pleasure speaking with you. And you know that for me, my biggest passion is sharing the knowledge, because I think just by planting little seeds in people's minds, it can actually lead to changing their lives, because we know that small seeds grow into the most beautiful plants. And it's the same with little thoughts and little ideas that you share with people, and then it's in their hands to develop it further and change their lives.
Exactly. So today, what we were discussing previously, we would like to discuss hormones, because they play such a crucial role in a female, especially in a female body, of course, also in males, but especially in female bodies. So hormones obviously is a big topic, but we will kind of focus on women's health today. So I'll give the word to you for starting a little
Yeah,
bit.
I think for me, something that, like, when I think about myself as a young girl, and I know this is the same experience for others, when our menstrual cycle comes, we are always taught that it's a sign that we're able to fall pregnant again. But we're never taught that it's actually our menstrual cycle is also a sign that can tell us about how our body is working and what the status of our body is. And most of women just see menstrual cycle as an inconvenience when it comes, that every month it kind of gets in the way of life, and they're happy if the cycle stops or if it doesn't come as frequently as it should, because we don't actually have the understanding of what it means. And I think the first step when thinking for women, when starting to think about hormones, is starting to understand that the same way that we'll look at our temperature, the same way that we'll measure our weight, for example, we can look at the monthly cycle and see what is the body trying to tell us. Because if you think about it, on average, every woman has between 400 and 500 periods in the menstruating years. So that adds up to 6 to 7 years of their life. And understanding what happens in that time, when it takes such a big time of your life, is so important. But we know that more than 70% of women think that discomfort or pain or mood swings or any other premenstrual symptoms that they experience every month are just part of being in the reproductive stage. But the reality is that these symptoms are common, but common doesn't mean normal. So we need to change this mindset that the discomfort is a normal part, and we need to try and understand what this discomfort is trying to tell us. So I would, if there is one thing that people take away from our conversation today, is the understanding that we need to stop thinking about the period as only relating to our ability to get pregnant. We need to think of it as an expression of our underlying health. Just as we would look at body temperature, heart rate, blood pressure, respiratory rate, our menstrual cycle is a sign of overall health. So if women just start to track their cycle and every month note the symptoms, note the experience they go through, they can understand sort of the SOS messages from the body and then start to explore further. And this is really something that every woman should be taught to do from very young age.
It's very interesting. I think the fear of getting pregnant has been ingrained in us so much that I think I remember the sort of bias of thinking you get pregnant immediately if you're not on the contraceptive pill, but not thinking about the sort of aftermath of what it means to be on such a cycle all over so many years, and that obviously impacting your life as well. So I think it's quite
absolutely. And also I think now we also are in an age where aesthetics and how we look is so important, and also like with social media, right? And the body dysmorphia and the image, distorted image that women often have of themselves, this also has a massive impact, because actually something we know from observing boys and girls going through puberty is that women can only start their menstrual cycle once their body fat goes above a certain percentage. And this is a big difference between men and women, so girls and boys. Boys tend to get leaner as they go through puberty, but girls tend to actually gain a fair amount of weight and body fat. And there is a very specific rise in body fat that triggers the brain to start secreting the hormones needed to trigger the menstrual cycle. So we know that quite often girls, for example, who participate in competitive sports, serious athletes, or anyone with eating disorders or like trying to undereat, right, to stay slim, we know that this category of women often have issues with the menstrual cycle. And if we look at research, the body fat percentage that women need to have in order to have a healthy menstrual cycle tends to be around 24%. However, when you speak to, I don't know, personal trainers and gyms and women often aim to have body fat percentage below 20%, and without realizing that actually we are designed to carry higher fat percentage on our body. And this is a big signal to the brain in order, if we can have like a normal menstrual cycle or not, because brain looks at this in a very prehistoric evolutionary terms, whereby it's all about, are we able to make babies or not? Yes, it dictates a lot more, but the brain, who is the conductor of all of these processes, all it thinks about is, do we have the energy resources in order to sustain a pregnancy and have a healthy baby?
Have you seen, and I think this is very, very important what you just said, a very important message in general, because due to social media, there's been studies where in just a recent one came out in Germany, where they saw that there's a massive increase in eating disorder in adolescent girls, especially because of social media.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we know that also with social media, it has a big impact on mental health, especially from what, like I remember the study whereby if you're not an active participant in terms of contributing to posts yourself, and you just using social media to look at other people's posts, it has a really negative impact on the mental health. So definitely social media has such a big role to play in this, and it's adding an extra constraint
of complexity,
which we have to work with. Exactly.
But I think even more so now, it's important to raise awareness of the importance of hormones, because if you start sort of your female reproductive journey on such a difficult way, it will sort of be a backpack you have to carry through life, because it doesn't only impact your reproductive system, it's also impacting your bones, your bone density, your cardiovascular system, as we know from women that are on the other side of the reproductive circle when coming to perimenopause and menopause.
Yep, exactly. And this is like girls who don't get their periods at the age they should, or girls who go through long periods of amenorrhea. Well, most of the time they're quite happy because they don't have to deal with the monthly discomfort. But as a result of this, when we don't have sufficient estrogen, for example, circulating in the body, it impacts our bone density at a young age. It can impact our brain. It can impact the way that everything in our body functions, because we know there are estrogen receptors in every cell in the body. And we need that exposure to estrogen. And like with all the hormones, there is always a golden middle. Too little and too much are not good. So we need to find that optimal window within which the body benefits.
Maybe we can start with the estrogens, because I think they're such a defining, obviously, female hormone. We know obviously that men have it too. And if you're a bodybuilder and you use anabolic steroids, you will create more estrogen as a result of degenerating testosterone. So you become more feminine and even can grow breasts. But that's so that can happen to men too. But so it's not what the focus today is about. The focus today is obviously to discuss how it impacts women. And one aspect I think is very interesting, which has to do with the mental well-being as well, or with the mental health, is that low levels of estrogen create anxiety in women. And that is something that a lot of young people that already suffer, for example, from eating disorders caused by social media, or women in perimenopause or menopause, are dealing with, and we maybe do not think about it. So I'm curious from your perspective to think of maybe how with nutrition we can start, because a lot of times we jump into solutions that are not necessarily the ones we should start with, such as hormonal replacement therapy.
Yeah, so hormones have a lot of impact on mental health for sure. And we know that, for example, during the reproductive years, the rise in estrogen is what is needed in order for us to have the ovulation. And it's only when we have the ovulation that we're able to produce progesterone. And progesterone has a direct calming effect on the brain. So often it's the imbalance between estrogen and progesterone that is linked to mood symptoms, PMS, anxiety, and so much more. But while it's, most of the time we think, okay, let's look at estrogen, progesterone. But for me, I always take a step back, because all the hormones in the body are interconnected. And you change one thing and you have a domino effect that impacts everything. And within the hormones, it's we're talking about a hormonal hierarchy, whereby not all the hormones are created equal, and we have some hormones that have a dominating impact on everything else. So, and they have like more power than others. And within that, we need to take a step back and think about our sort of stress hormone, cortisol. It's literature, it's often called the hormone of a rushing woman, constantly being on the go. And also insulin, which is our blood sugar hormone, because issues with those two hormones will always impact what is happening with estrogen and progesterone. And most of the people that I work with, we always start with addressing these two hormones before we move on to what else may be happening in terms of the sex hormones balance.
Interesting. And also, yeah, of course, makes complete sense.
And it's sort of like taking a step back to how are we eating, how are we
Yeah.
managing stress, how are we sleeping? Because sleep is like a foundation of what happens to our blood sugar and what happens to our cortisol levels throughout the day, because cortisol has a diurnal pattern, it has a circadian rhythm, and sleep has, okay, it's a chicken and egg, because obviously disrupted cortisol disrupts the sleep, but disrupted sleep also disrupts the cortisol. So looking at how people eat, how people sleep, how people relax is very important. And sleep for me, like so many people come through the door and either they think they are super women and they don't need more than 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night, which is for majority of people not true. Maybe you have a few percentage of people who can survive on that, but we know that for majority of people we need 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. And or there are people who are in bed for that time, but they constantly waking up and can't go back to sleep. And or they struggle to fall asleep in the first place. And the quality of sleep also matters. But what's interesting is essentially like when we don't get enough sleep, it disrupts our blood sugar regulation. We know that there was a research published very, earlier this year that one of the biggest factors that predisposes to diabetes is poor sleep. So we often think of diabetes as diet and sugar intake, but actually sleep has a really big impact, because getting 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night for a few nights in a row makes us pre-diabetic and insulin resistant.
Yeah, I mean, there's been so many of these people that work in night shifts and have like alternated work hours during the night, or and then have to sort of change their system completely and sleep during daytime and be awake and work during the night, that they have actually worse or they are prone to risk for cardiovascular disease and diabetes.
Yeah, we know there's a lot of
Overweight.
research that's done on shift workers, and
Yeah.
hat off to people who have to work shifts
Yeah.
in order to make our lives comfortable. But those people need to be a lot more diligent with how they manage their lifestyles, their diet, and sort of the rest and work cycles. And we know that like just by addressing sleep, we can shift so many other systems in the body. And another element is stress, because we all live in a world where we constantly on, right? Without an off switch. And especially women these days, right? Women are mothers. Women also have like wives. They need to maintain a household, but they also often have careers. And we try and show that we can do everything. But
Yeah.
I think we forget that back in the day, women never did everything alone. We lived in big communities where we helped each other, and we had the families were big, and we had the communities with neighbors and so on, whereby we had a lot of helping hand. We didn't do everything single-handedly, but we went through a period of many years where a woman was trying to be everything. And it's just a lot of, like, I define stress as a life load, meaning everything that's going on in your life. And while we don't actually need, in order to manage stress, we don't need to dedicate hours and hours a day, but we need to remember that we need to switch off, that we need to have moments, and it can be as little as 5 minutes a day, a few times a day, to just slow down and reset. Because when the body when the brain doesn't feel like the body's in control, like we're in control of the situation, this is a sign to keep the stress level, like keep the stress levels elevated. And what we know with stress patterns is we don't just go from normal to burnout. There are different phases of how the body readjusts depending on how much we have on our plate. So, we have this drive and we're enjoying it. And yes, we don't have time to sleep, we don't have time to rest, but it's, all exciting. But then at some point, you lose that excitement. It becomes a lot more tiring to get things done. You lose the positive emotions from it, right? And at some point, you realize you're not rested, you can't get out of bed. And the end point is just being really flat energy, whereby the brain just puts brakes on everything in the body. So we need to recognize that we don't have the infinite resources and we need to kind of replenish them.
I think that's a very, very good point, because so many times we realize it when it's kind of too late, because we pushed and it felt exciting in the beginning, or until quite a long time. It does feel great and good. But then you hit some kind of a wall, and then it just everything crumbles. And then to repair that takes much longer than actually prevent this from happening.
And it's what I find with people, it's the free advice that is the hardest for people to implement. It's when you tell people all you need to do is have several short breaks in your day, like say 5 minutes, whereby you either sit down to breathe, to meditate, maybe go out for a walk in the sunshine, or just do something that makes you laugh. But people struggle to implement that. They struggle to, and to be honest, I'm no different, and it's something I'm still working on with myself in busy days, to remind myself that I need to press the pause button. And because it's just so, it's like your body thinks I don't have enough time, time. But and then at the end of the day, this is just 5 minutes. And it's something that we need. It's consistently doing it. So it becomes habitual, and the body then learns that, yes, this person's in control. She can handle it. However, it obviously needs to be combined with sleep. And I think that sleep and good quality diet that gives us the nutrients we need should be two non-negotiables, regardless of what happens in our lives. And sadly, quite often, the companies, the employers are often the ones that don't allow for this opportunity. And I have so many friends who are being pushed above physical capacity of any human, not being allowed enough time to rest and recover and recuperate. And at the same time, we know that the companies just fill their offices with sugary and caffeinated snacks rather than things that the body really needs. Because with us, when we're running on stress, it's actually really depleting in terms of nutrients. So we need a lot more, quite often a lot more than we can even get through the diet. So when we're not even getting the basics through the diet, then the body gets really depleted over time. And this just contributes to the intensity of the symptoms that we experience.
Okay. I think one thing that is important to mention also when it comes to the sleep stress is stress being a chronic disease. It's an inflammatory disease, and it's not necessarily chronic if it just happens in one time, but it is often not the case. We often have underlying stress that we have that may peak in times, but it's just constantly there. And that is also what is it's your body being on an inflamed all the time. And that has a lot of negative impacts on this whole system.
Yeah, absolutely. We know that short-term stress suppresses inflammation, but when we under stress for continuous periods of time without reprieve, then it has an inflammatory effect on the body, and it influences so much. It influences digestive health. And digestive health is linked to everything, right? We know there is a gut access to everything else in the body, and we know that stress suppresses the immune system. Whenever we do the digestive tests on people, most of the time we see that digestive system is really suppressed because 90% of immune system is in the gut, and I 90% of the gut tests that I see from people have really suppressed immune system, and it's often the effect of stress. And we know that, for like, just to give you an example again with the digestive health, we know that when we try and address the digestive disorders, we can try and finish a protocol, get someone better, but they often relapse if the stress is not addressed. So to me, working on stress is such a big foundational element. And luckily now we also have some technical devices now that are available to help people activate the vagus nerves, get them into a more relaxed state, but also going back to basics, chanting, meditations, yoga, but not the yoga kind that, makes you sweat and be out of breath, but the more relaxing ones. All of those practices that have been there for decades are the ones that help reset the nervous system.
I can share a little intervention I've done maybe 3/4 of a year ago. So I noticed that actually last summer, because my family has been on very stressful situation. My partner's been very stressed all the time because of his work, and I felt carrying all this was too much. So I started to, and I realized that I needed sort of downtime before the evening, sort of the day finishes, especially as you mentioned, like women being on all the time, right? And I could also not just say to everyone else, do these 5 minutes to 10 to 15 minutes of daily routine when I'm not doing it myself. So I've implemented a 15-minute yoga before dinner. And I do it no matter what now. It's like brushing my teeth. So this has actually been very helpful because
I love that.
It's calming down the day. It's switching off from being on, and yes, there's laundry to be folded, and yes, there's this to prepare for tomorrow, and yes, there's a dinner to put on the table, even though my husband cooked maybe, but still there's like so many things. But these 15 minutes are very nice. And if my son, he's only 17 months, still awake, he would sometimes come over, and he has been very calm when I've done this yoga.
Yeah, and I think, again, we need to learn to keep these practices regardless of distractions. Our kids maybe play nearby asking for attention, but over time, they start to understand that this is our time, and they either can, get involved and create their own little practice, or they play on the side and we learn to focus on ourselves rather than get distracted. But it's a process, and it's amazing that you've experienced this. It prepares your also body for taking the food in and benefiting from the nutrients. It's because, oh my God, we can go down the rabbit hole here, so I know we don't really have time, but it's just, again, like how our nervous system really impacts the way that our body can accept the food that we're taking in and actually get the nutrients out of it.
Before we close for today, maybe just a couple of food nutrition suggestions for minor interventions that women can do in order to help them to deal with this stress, and also are positive for their hormonal balance.
Yeah. So on the nutrition side, I think if I were to recommend one thing is most women can benefit from a good breakfast. So rather than running on coffee and croissants, prioritizing your morning meal and making sure that the meal has wholesome foods, whether it's eggs with avocado and berries, whether it's Greek yogurt with some nuts and seeds and some berries. Or there are lots of other variations, but most of the time people run out, they grab a coffee and they grab bakery. And that means they're running on caffeine and high sugar, which starts the day on a roller coaster. And most people again say, oh, I don't need to have food in the morning. I can just be okay with just coffee. And then at the end of the day, it just again sends them on the roller coaster. So for most women, prioritizing breakfast and making sure we're getting protein and nutrients in that breakfast meal is very important. And in terms of the lifestyle elements, I would say that if everyone can say, okay, this week I'm going to go to bed half an hour earlier as the first step, I think that's going to be a very important step. I'm not going to straight away say, go to bed an hour or two earlier. We need to start, we slowly, right, build.
Because otherwise it's not sustainable. Yeah.
And maybe some people go to bed later, wake up later, but it's about being consistently in the same routine. If someone goes to bed at midnight and wakes up at 8 every day, but they're able to do it all the time, then they have a consistent routine and their body hormonal rhythm adjusts to that. But if some days they go to bed at 10, some days at 1 in the morning, and then, they have to get up at 5 or 6 all the time, then it's very disruptive. So, and I think most of us, due to circumstances, whether it's having children, because children have to go to school quite early on, or whether, it's our own work commitments, most of us have to get up quite at an early, reasonable hour. So I think for most people, an advice of making your bedtime half an hour earlier to start with, and then aiming to extend that period to even earlier once you get comfortable with that, is something that's going to make a big difference.
I'll follow your advice. I will implement it today again. I followed it for a week, and then we again going back on a better earlier rhythm that I used to have before kids, but we went to Sweden and everything got so disrupted because the circadian rhythm has been so out of synchrony. So yeah, good reminder. Thank you. Yeah, we cannot just tell everyone else and not follow it ourselves. So I will listen to your advice and start today to get back into a healthier schedule. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. Well, thank you very, very much. This was, as always, incredibly insightful and energizing, and a lot of good points to share.
Thank you very much. I always enjoy speaking to you and sharing the knowledge across the world. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
And I hope that we can take this forward in the future.
I agree. Thank you. And yeah, if anyone has inputs and feedback, then please don't hesitate to reach out. I will share your Instagram so people can get to know and reach out in that way.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again.
Enjoy the rest of the day.
Yeah, you too. Bye.